Hey guys, Brutal here. In my previous video, I showcased how to clear from Kragmaw the Infested to Sporecaller Xancha, explaining what each NPC between those two bosses would do upon engaging them in combat and how to murder Sporecaller Xancha himself. Now that you've taken the third boss out of the dungeon, it's time to start making your way down to the fourth and final encounter, the Unbound Abomination. As always, keep in mind that this is not a one-size-fits-all guide, as each week's affixes will alter routes, pull patterns, crowd control, and much more. So use this as a general guide and consider what changes take place from week to week to give yourself a competitive edge when a particularly difficult collection of affixes are present. Something I want to mention and showcase right away is the hilarious means to skip quite literally every NPC in this area of the dungeon other than the last two NPCs you'll face, known as the Faceless Corrupters, as they happen to be guarding the entryway to the final boss's room. From Sporecaller Xancha's room, you actually wander just slightly to the left and you loop around behind the first Faceless Corruptor you encounter, and you hug the wall, dodging a grotesque horror, continuing to hug the wall to avoid a fallen Death Speaker and his reanimated guardians, and being careful not to pull a patrolling Faceless Corruptor and more stationary grotesque horrors by hugging the next wall you find. You have absolute control over what you kill and what you avoid at this point. So plan out your route via method dungeon tools. It is a godsend. I cannot say this enough. I suppose I should also specify that I've never seen a group go to the left after you kill Sporecaller Xancha, as it simply takes longer to reach the final boss by going this way. Not only that, but you're forced to pull more NPCs to reach 100% enemy force count, and it slows down your dungeon run considerably. Just stick to going right for simplicity's sake. Oh, also, there's a shortcut to get back to this portion of the dungeon. After you kill Sporecaller Xancha, a route opens in the actual dungeon itself. Going back to Elder Liex's area, take a left-hand turn after crossing the bridge just beyond her corpse. And if you hug the wall to the right after ducking into that little tunnel, you'll be right back in the final area of the dungeon. Anywho, you know how to handle every single ability from every single NPC in this region of the dungeon, other than what the Faceless Corruptor throws your way. These guys only have two abilities, Maddening Gaze and Abyssal Reach. Maddening Gaze is a shadow damage spell that also fears you, and it hits like a truck. To avoid it, the only thing you need to worry about is not standing in front of him. You can be anywhere else other than directly in front of him. It's that easy to deal with, truly. You cannot interrupt it, but you can knock him back with an Engineering Belt attachment, or a Druid's Typhoon, or, even a Death Grip from a Death Knight in case you wanted to. The Abyssal Reach spell is a little more annoying to handle, as various shadowy tendrils will spawn around the area, and you're forced to move away from them, lest you want to take a slap to the face from one of them. Be careful not to move away from a tendril right into a Maddening Gaze. That could lead to complications to say the least. Having used method dungeon tools, you know what you're planning on pulling in this area. Or I would hope so at least. Most groups elect to kill the grotesque horror and the blood-sworn defiler directly to the right after leaving Sporecaller Xancha's room. And then most groups engage the fallen Death Speaker with the reanimated guardians afterward. From here, depending upon what you have left to reach 100% enemy force count, you can either kill additional grotesque horrors and a patrolling Faceless Corruptor, or you can skip to the last two NPCs who guard the doorway to the Unbound Abomination. Regardless, when you do eventually pull the two Faceless Corruptors, be careful not to run around too much or to get hit by a Maddening Gaze, because if you skip the nearby grotesque horrors, you could easily face pull one of them and cause your group to wipe. Just dodge the Faceless Corruptor's abilities and get ready to get pulled down to face the final boss. Oh, one quick word of advice. If someone dies and requires a res, move a reasonable distance from the doorway to the Unbound Abomination before casting the res. Otherwise, you will get pulled down and the res will be interrupted, forcing the player to run back the entire way. Even with the shortcut I spoke of earlier, this is a considerable waste of time. Now that you're ready to face down the last boss of the dungeon, let's go over his abilities. The Unbound Abomination only has a couple of abilities to discuss: Vile Expulsion and Putrid Blood. But there's a lot more to point out here about this fight than just his two abilities. Also, you will notice that for this encounter, you are accompanied by an NPC named Titan Keeper Hezrel. You actually originally found him out in the swamps of Nazmir, and he became active after you killed Sporecaller Xancha, but he finally starts showing up and doing something during this fight. But more on him later. The first ability we'll discuss is the Vile Expulsion. Throughout the fight, the boss will turn toward a random player and vomit out a bunch of corruption on the ground. Don't stand in front of him when he's spewing the corruption, and don't stand in the corruption on the ground, or you'll just take unnecessary damage. The trick to this ability, however, doesn't stem from dodging it or healing through it. No, my friends. It stems from the tank in your group positioning the boss properly and making sure the other 4 members of the group are stacked with him. You see, by facing the Unbound Abomination toward existing corruption on the ground and making sure every player in the group has their back to it by stacking on the tank, it guarantees that the next Vile Expulsion will land on a large portion of the room that is already covered by corruption. You will never, ever run out of room to maneuver the boss by utilizing this method. Far too often, I've seen tanks tank him against the wall or players positioning themselves anywhere they please. But by forcing him to vomit on existing corruption, it prevents 99.99% of the issues you will face in this encounter. I'm getting a little animated. I apologize. This is a huge pet peeve for me. Good grief. Just have your tank pull him toward the inner ring and turn him toward corruption on the ground. So long as your group is stacked on the tank, that's all you need to do. I cannot emphasize this enough. Please, for real, do this. Don't complicate it. His other ability, Putrid Blood, is a stacking magical debuff that deals periodic shadow damage, and while it is dispellable, it's actually handled by an ability called Cleansing Light from good old Titan Keeper Hezrel across the room, and he throws it your way. This puts a large circle of light around a player, and after 5 seconds, it will explode and clear not only the stacks of putrid blood off of players, but it also cleanses any corruption on the ground where that player was standing. The only other ability that I feel the need to shine a light on are the rotting spores floating around the room. While this isn't technically an ability the boss is throwing your way, it's something you need to be aware of. Throughout the fight, the corruption on the ground will coalesce and a rotting spore will spawn, and it'll slowly start chasing you down. If you come into contact with a rotting spore, you will take massive shadow damage, and it will place a new pool of corruption on the floor. The easiest way to deal with this passive problem is to notice when any rotting spores are approaching the group and to use various AoE abilities. Protection warriors can Thunderclap, outlaw rogues can Blade Flurry, hunters can multi-shot, you get the idea. As for the boss's health, you've probably noticed that he's not actually taking damage. Instead, he's actually converting your damage into blood energy. And 3 times during the fight, after reaching 100 blood energy, he summons blood visages. He summons them 2 at a time, and the first 2 times he summons those blood visages, you can ignore them. In other words, 6 total blood visages spawn, 2 at a time, and you can ignore the first 2 sets of 2. So 1, 2, 3, 4, ignore the first 4, and you'll actually kill the 5th and 6th that spawn together. You see, Titan Keeper Hezrel has an ability called Purge Corruption, and he channels that into a blood visage to kill them and to take them out of the fight. Each time a blood visage dies, the boss takes about a sixth of his health as damage. When he summons his final 2 blood visages, the third and final set, everyone can and should swap to the nearest one and blow it to smithereens. There's no reason whatsoever to deal damage to the Unbound Abomination when this last set of blood visages spawns. Swap to him, kill them, and congratulations, you have officially and successfully completed the Underrot dungeon. Way to go, partner. You did it. Give yourselves a round of applause and a pat on the back. And by the way, I cannot thank you enough for watching my Mythic Plus video guides for the Underrot dungeon. You can expect many more to come in the near future, and I'll eventually get around to coaching you through seasonal affixes too. For now, if you have any additional tips or tricks you think I missed, please let me know in the comments below. Also, don't be afraid to ask for clarification. Or if you think I'm mistaken about something, well, just let me know, and I will correct it in a future video. My name is Brutal, and feel free to share this video and the rest of my Mythic Plus guides with your guild, your communities, your friends, and as always, be well.